Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brice, and it's obviously a show for you today on basketball as we talk about everything that is basketball. Right here on the podcast, we can keep it straight with you today. Let's talk about different things that happened around the league this past weekend, and news and notes also coming out of the week in college and both NBA basketball. So we're going to get into all of that right here on the podcast. Thank you for tuning in again. And like I said, let's talk some basketball. So to start off, obviously a big game happened this weekend as the Lakers and the Clippers played on Sunday, primetime, ABC. And the Lakers were able to win their first game this season in the Battle of LA. LeBron James had his best game in this season series, dropping 28 points in this game. Puma with clutch baskets late, and Avery Bradley having an explosive third quarter, I feel like was what really took them over the top and was able to defeat the Los Angeles Clippers. Obviously, this was big for the Lakers. Just, to be able to beat this team, to be able to beat a team that, has beaten you for a second. They've been able to beat you. They've been able to basically had a 2-0 series lead in the season before this game, just to get that mental into your head. Okay, yeah, we definitely can beat these guys, because you may think we can beat them because we have them, but sometimes in your head, if you don't actually get that W at the end of the day, it can affect if you think you can beat them. And so it was very important for the Lakers to get this W and for LeBron to have a big game, and he did just that, and that's why they're in the position they're in now. So good for LeBron, able to come out with a good victory in this game and do a lot of things that they need to do to compete at a high level. So you can't really hate on that, can't really disrespect it, and it's just good for them going into it. From the Clippers side of things, obviously, some people may make excuses to think the Clippers just really didn't play as well as they could have. We really don't know. It's supposed to be a Clipper home game, even though it's never really a home game in this series. It just depends on whose fans come out more. But overall, it was a good game, a very good game. This game is one of the reasons why you expect these two teams to be there at the end in the Western Conference Finals, competing to go to the NBA Finals. People feel like these are the two best teams in basketball. So, this Lakers week highlighted is not even just with this win; it's also with the win against the Milwaukee Bucks Friday, because they beat two quality teams, the best team in the Eastern Conference, and then from what some people may say, the best team in the Western Conference, in back-to-back games, 3 days, and they beat them, and they beat them handily in the fourth quarter, especially when they started to get away and was able to compete at a high level at that regard in that situation. You can't be mad at it. You can't hate it. And this also has definitely boosted LeBron's MVP status, as this pushes him more towards, the MVP. Obviously, it's very impressive, that LeBron, has, done this in the 17th year, still competing, playing at a high level. And, it just shows how great he is as a player. And et cetera and so forth. So, it's just something that I think really comes into play. And I think that you can't hate. All you got to do is just come out there and compete at a high level. And, the Lakers did that. And they were able to pick up good quality victories, quick, good quality wins. So, and you just got to see what happens. So obviously that's big for obviously Laker fans. So like I said, to get this win and to have bragging rights for maybe a little bit longer, because obviously we know that fourth game, since it's like at the end of the regular season, they're probably not going to play their starters at that point. So this game was really the last game for the Lakers to win a game going into the playoffs against this team. And now we have to see what happens when the playoffs come around and what happens with both of these teams moving forward. Obviously, I'm sure people still think the Clippers are the better team. There may be some people who were swayed and said now the Lakers are the better team. It just really depends on your side of it, why you think that, if you break down why you think which team is better, and you go from there. So, but in other news around the league, Giannis is sitting out a couple of games with a minor knee sprain. He sprained it at the end of the Lakers game on Friday. So Giannis is going to miss a couple of games. Could hurt his MVP chances, we'll see. Obviously, I understand they're just trying to make sure Giannis is healthy. They don't want to put him out there unnecessarily because they know what the bigger picture is. They know that it's important for Giannis to be on top of his game. It's important for Giannis to be healthy if they have a chance to win in the playoffs. You don't want to potentially, you don't want them to potentially not be able to play at a high level because Giannis maybe is hurt limping into the playoffs. You want to make sure Giannis is healthy when you get to that point so you know that you're going to get your best foot forward from the best player on your team and that they're going to be able to win. Because at the end of the day, it's all about winning. It's all about being victorious. And, that's just how that goes. They're going to be smart, obviously, playing some decent teams also after that. All we can do is wish Giannis a fast and healthy recovery. Giannis is an absolute sight to see on the court. An absolute sight to see play. You don't want to see a guy like that get hurt. And, we're going to see if Milwaukee can get through the entire Eastern Conference playoffs. So, they're going to need him at full strength like everybody else. Actually, a few Milwaukee Bucks are dealing with some injuries. But obviously, Giannis is the most important one. Because without him, I'm sure a lot of people feel like this Milwaukee team is maybe a non-playoff team to an 8th seed in a lot of people's eyes. If Chris Middleton is your best player. So, obviously, we hope for the best and wish Giannis a speedy recovery. And we can see him playing some gracious basketball on the court. The Greek Freak going out there dominating, imposing his will on multiple teams, multiple players, and so on and so forth. So, and then lastly in this segment, Lance Stevenson, as I said before, was in talks to return to the league. Well, now he's in talks to return to the team that he started his craze with, the Lance Stevenson hype. The Indiana Pacers, or him and Indiana, are in strong talks. They're in very strong talks right now about coming back. They're in strong talks about, in strong talks about returning to this team, adding another guy off the bench that can, score, make some plays for you. There's nothing wrong with that. And it works. So, obviously, Indiana trying to probably finally bolster their playoff roster, trying to get it finalized. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you just got to keep going out there and competing at a high level and do what you got to do. So if you do that, it puts you in a good position to be successful and to win. And maybe Indiana could get an upset potentially in the first round of the playoffs. Because obviously those are the type of things that really matter, for teams like Indiana moving forward. But coming up next, we're going to talk about the Brooklyn head coach, Kenny Atkinson, getting let go, his issues with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and also Chris Paul leads a comeback win against the Celtics this past weekend. All that here and more on the podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the Lakers winning the Battle of LA for the first time this season, what that meant for the Lakers, and LeBron James playing one of his best games of the season. Obviously, the outlook on the future with both of these teams and the impact that it had on both of these teams, as again, they're both trying to sit out here and play at the highest and produce at the highest level. Just trying to represent, trying to do what they got to do out there. But also, we talked about Giannis having a minor knee sprain, missing a couple of games, but he'll be back. We don't know when yet, but he'll be back. Obviously, Bucks are being cautious. They want to make sure he's healthy and ready to go at all times, so they're not putting him into harm's way potentially ruining their potential playoff chances in the future. Obviously, you don't want to do that because that would be looked very down upon. And lastly, we talk about also Lance Stephenson reuniting with the Pacers. Obviously, the Pacers are the team that the Lance Stephenson craze started with, and so if he reunited with them, that would be absolutely fantastic. But anyway, going into the next segment now, we're going to talk about the Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Nets head coach position as basically, in this position, Kenny Atkinson was let go by the Brooklyn Nets because they felt like they needed to go in a new direction. Obviously, right now, Brooklyn is currently seated in the playoffs right now. And if everything works out, you would think they should make the playoffs. Obviously, they lost Kyrie Irving for the rest of the year with injuries. KD was out for the year when they signed him because of his torn Achilles in the finals. So this was more of a just see where you are before Kevin Durant comes back type of season. And now you haven't had really both stars at all this season. And one of the interesting things about the story was it has been reported that players were not fond of Kenny Atkinson. And now there's more reports coming out that everybody kind of guessed it, but it had something to do with Kyrie and Kevin Durant. And it wasn't one-sided. Kenny Atkinson was also reported not to really be fond of coaching those guys. So, if that's the case, it sounds like he felt like for what he is as a coach, he did not want to coach stars in that way. Kenny Atkinson seems like a guy who likes to build a team and coach players. He can, maybe young players, maybe young up-and-coming talent, and get the most out of all his parts, then have a player who is a superstar, selfish player. That's the thing about a lot of players that a lot of people assume in the NBA is that if you're a top-of-the-line player, you kind of have to listen to the player because they're the superstar. You have to do what the superstar wants. And he was just not sure if he wanted to deal with that nor coach it. So he decided to leave it. It was also reported that, obviously Kyrie Irving and his camp really didn't like him too much. They felt like he wasn't going to do what they need him to do to make this team reach its full potential. They said also Kyrie Irving's camp prefers a guy like Ty Lue, someone he went and played in Cleveland with. So that's a guy that they say that he preferred to play with. Also, they said on Kevin Durant's side of things that he preferred to play with maybe Mark Jackson. They also say that when DeAndre Jordan was benched, that changed the dynamic also between all of those guys. Because obviously they brought in DeAndre Jordan because he's a friend of his to still get his money. And, one of the lead-ups to this is that after a blowout loss to the Memphis Grizzlies, the Nets players and Kenny Atkinson had honest and frank discussions as tensions reached a boiling point over the last week leading up to Atkinson's firing over the weekend. During the Wednesday meeting, players expressed frustration with how the team played in its blowout loss, but also voiced wilder concerns about Atkinson's rotations and pecking orders. Obviously, if you have your players not believing in you, that probably does not suit well for you as a coach because now that's an issue. Obviously, Kevin Durant has been along for the ride and seen what this player has done. And there was also reports, that says Kevin Durant did not think the culture they were building in Brooklyn was meant to win a championship. That's not a championship culture. They didn't think it was going to help them win a championship long term and in the future. Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant never really connected with their head coach, and there was growing belief that the two stars did not want to play for him next year. And one of the main things that I've seen out of this entire story is that it seems like communication was the biggest issue. And not knowing, and I guess not everybody knowing their role. And I think that's kind of where the big issue is. And I just think that's one of the biggest things ever. And, when he met with the GM, Sean Marks, they said that Kenny Atkinson asked, hey, go ahead, fire me. I'd rather get fired now and know my future is changing than wait to the end of the season for an inevitable firing. Because I feel like it is very frustrating as a coach, I think, if you know what's about to happen and you're about to get fired and you're just coaching and there's no point. And even if the player, because if you get that energy, the players even know it. It's just like, who's going to play hard for you? So it's kind of one of those things that was really a frustrating situation. But obviously, we'll have to see what happens. It'll be interesting to see who Brooklyn decides to hire as their next head coach. Because obviously you need someone who could play with KD and Kyrie. And I'm sure either one would take Ty Lue, because he's won a championship, or Mark Jackson, because Mark Jackson, you always feel like Mark Jackson has always preached winning basketball. He seems like he knows winning basketball. He has said it multiple times with Golden State. He established the foundation in Golden State. he established all the work ethic that they go through and everything at Golden State. And then when Steve Kerr took over, it just helped. It just helped them. It helped them be better at all ends. Like Mark Jackson was on you. He'll make sure he expects the most out of you. He knows how to teach greatness, and I think that's why the Golden State Warriors really got off the ground when he left. So I would think if your star players, usually, like I said, this is why everybody thinks stars run the league. If your star players want those two as their main people, definitely I think Brooklyn, you don't want a situation where whoever you bring in, they don't want to play for, because that could cause a disconnect on the team. So whoever you actually end up bringing in, you need to make sure that they connect with Kyrie and with Kevin Durant. Because if you don't, you're going to have the same issues, and I'm sure you don't want the same issues. You never want the same issues. So hopefully, the Nets get the situation resolved. We know what direction they're heading in. We'll probably hear more things over the season, and we'll just have to see what happens going into it, next season. Obviously, I didn't have enough time to talk about the Chris Paul comeback, so we'll talk about that next segment. Also, we're going to talk about the NBA and how they've been dealing with the latest coronavirus, what the procedures and things they have in place and memos they've sent out around the league, and also Joakim Noah signing with the Clippers. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we really broke down literally the whole segment about the Brooklyn head coach situation, what happened in Brooklyn, why it happened in Brooklyn, the situations moving forward, and the future of the Nets franchise. Obviously, Kevin Durant, Kyrie not very fond of Kenny Atkinson, and Kenny Atkinson also not being very fond of Kyrie and KD. So obviously that cut had to be made. They had to make that change. They felt like the change was necessary, and now all we can do is see what happens with the Nets for the rest of the season. We'll see who they actually decide to potentially hire, and we'll go from there. So, that obviously just made the big rounds on the NBA this past weekend. Obviously, because again, it was an unexpected firing, and basically, it's happened. But now we're going to get into some big news. Obviously, if you paid attention to just world news, the coronavirus has hit the United States and has hit the world. And a lot of people obviously are panicking, and, obviously nobody wants to get the coronavirus because, the chance of death and everything like that. So, obviously, this has been a big panic point in the United States because a lot of sporting leagues are trying to reduce access to players and personnel because you don't want your players getting it, and etc. Basically, even though this is like more general sports than basketball, all of the major leagues have decided to limit locker room access, including the NBA. The NBA has sent memos out talking about players should not high five, they should fist bump. They've talked about how NBA players, personnel, and whoever is allowed in the locker room is restricted. They've even entertained playing games without fans in the arena. And the interesting thing about that is that's gotten some pushback. LeBron James has said if they did something like that, he would not play because he's playing for the fans. He's not playing to play in empty arenas. This could cause a product to suffer because if you're watching this on TV, it'd be pretty weird to, it'd be very weird to watch empty arena games. You wouldn't feel, obviously, atmosphere. You wouldn't feel intensity. It would really hurt the basketball product. And I think that's something that they don't want to do. Now, Wednesday, they're supposed to have a call about the coronavirus and what their plans are moving forward. Obviously, this is going to be a very big discussion point. And, it's something I think that would be just something we have to see what happens going into the future. Obviously, we don't want to see it, but obviously they're going to do what they got to do. Some of their plans for the coronavirus was only players and team personnel in the locker room, and also 6 to 8 feet between players and media. So obviously that's one of the first changes they would want to make to create the space needed so you don't feel like the players are at risk. You don't want, I guess, anybody getting sick with it because that would be very, very disastrous. I mean, they've also told teams, like, hey, you need to get infectious disease and public health experts to help you out with this. Like I said, when this Wednesday conference call happens, they'll be able to, figure it out. Obviously, there's concerns among owners and executives that drastic steps could be coming for the league, including games played with only essential personnel in arenas. And, this has been something the NBA is required the teams to be able to execute. And it's just been a big scare across all platforms. So, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. You don't obviously want the players to get sick. You don't want anything to happen. You don't want to cause any potential issues in the future. And you just hope for the best. Hopefully they don't have to. And it's one of those things that, hopefully nothing too drastic happens because of this situation. Because if it does, then obviously that's not, again, an ideal situation. And, you just got to hope for the best. So you just got to hope for the best, really. Hopefully we won't get those empty arena games. I'm sure nobody wants that. And I'm sure the players don't want it either. I'm sure it'd be very, very awkward for them to play in an empty arena with nobody around. And obviously, since Wednesday will be when they have their conference call, I'll be sure to give you the information on Thursday, Friday, about what happens on this podcast and break it down from there. So stay tuned for that. But now I'm going to get to the Chris Paul. Chris Paul leads a comeback against the Boston Celtics, one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. Dennis Schroeder gets a steal that will seal the game, but Chris Paul made some clutch shots to tie the game, and Oklahoma City was able to pick up the win against the Boston Celtics. It's obviously a great performance for Chris Paul. Chris Paul continues to do it again. Continues to prove why he's one of the best point guards to play this game. This is the reason why the Knicks are trying to potentially pursue Chris Paul, because they want this kind of impact on their team. And I mean, you can't blame them. You really can't blame them. They need something up there in New York, but obviously just a great performance for Chris Paul. It'll be interesting to see how entertaining they can keep a playoff series when they get to the playoffs. I think right now they're actually scheduled to face the Denver Nuggets. I think out of all the top 3 teams, I'm sure they feel like that would probably be the team most likely they could beat the Denver Nuggets out of the 3 top teams in the Western Conference, because you just don't know about Denver sometimes, but we'll have to see when that gets there. But obviously, like I said, great win for Oklahoma City, and we'll have to just see what happens going into the future. Now, we're going to talk about Joakim Noah. I know, Joakim Noah. Still in the league. Still playing. Obviously known as a defensive player, a defensive enforcer, tough guy, a dog. He has signed to the LA Clippers. And so the Clippers now have them that dog. Another one, actually. Adding more depth to their lineup. I believe they brought him in because the one weakness on the Clippers is size. They don't really have, outside of Zubac, they don't really have a lot of size. Montrezl Harrell is a great big man, but he's not like a big man who can guard other big men efficiently. Joakim Noah is probably precisely brought in here to guard guys like Anthony Davis, Joker, Dwight Howard, those guys, and match up with them and play good physical defense with them. Make them earn all their points, make them earn all their shots. And I think, and maybe to help Montrezl, because, you know, obviously that may be a lot of pressure on Montrezl having to guard those guys. And so getting him in there and getting him to be able to come and join the team really probably could help out from that perspective in terms of depth and moving forward. So obviously that's good for them. So we'll have to see what kind of happens here. So obviously another good pickup, I would say, for the Clippers moving forward. But coming up next, Hawks CEO says they should push the season back to December so they don't have to compete with the NFL. Dirk has a job offer to join the Mavs. The Lakers want to add another shooter, and the Lakers also have offered Alex Caruso for D Rose at the trade deadline. I'll talk about all my thoughts on that and more right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we obviously talked about more things around the NBA. We talked about the coronavirus in the NBA, what the NBA is trying to do to help prevent any type of coronavirus from getting to their players. Also, some procedures they may have to take, which could be very drastic procedures, which I am very, 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 very sure that some of the things we've heard, the fans and the players definitely do not want that. So obviously we hope that they can find a solution that fits everybody's situation pretty soon here. Also, the Clippers signed Joakim Noah. Obviously, we know why they brought him in. Another tough guy, help defend guys like Anthony Davis and the Joker going into the future. And also, I talked about Chris Paul leading a comeback win against the Celtics. And again, just giving them more appreciation to Chris Paul and the type of player he's been this entire season as he's continued to put them in the right direction. So now we're going to get into some news and notes around the league, just around the league. The Hawks CEO says they should push the season back to December. an interesting concept because obviously, as you know, the NBA season starts in October, the regular season, like the end of October, I believe. He feels like, well, if we want basketball to be popular year-round, we need to start it when the NFL season is coming to an end, because then, at that point, we're not having to compete with NFL games. Because think about it, October, you still have 2 months of the season left. So, any games that are placed on Monday, Thursday, Friday, and college football on Saturdays, NBA is not going to get a lot of attention. That's why nobody really watches the NBA till after Christmas, because that's when football starts to die down and basketball starts to pick up. So that's why I think it could be smart if they did push it back, because let's say you started basketball. Let's say your opening night game was let's say a Christmas Day game, and then the season started after that. By that time, outside of the playoffs and football, you're pretty much not dealing with too much competition. I mean, you have bowl games. Obviously, that happens. But, there's no way you can never not go against something on television. But think about it. The season really, like I said, dies down in the playoffs because you only have lesser games. So what happens is, once those games are over, you still can get plenty of people watching basketball, still keeping your ratings high. And also, nobody thinks about this. You know that gap after the NBA Finals ends in June, where you don't have July, or basically you don't have the half of June, July, and then kind of August because nobody watches preseason of football. Well, if you push it back 2 months, and let's say the NBA Finals ends in late July, potentially, because of this shift in the schedule, that then kind of closes that gap in terms of what people consider the most boring part of the sports year. Unless you're a baseball fan around that time or a soccer fan, that could be considered some of the most boring parts of the year. And you'll always have one of those sports of football or basketball still on, and then you just have to go through a month of preseason football, but there's still hype about football coming back. And then that way, it can also hopefully maximize the ratings. It can also maximize rating in the NFL just because, there's no basketball games on. Because you have people who are football fans but love basketball too. So maybe that can help with their ratings. That can get a couple more viewers on, what's happening. So obviously, that was just an idea he came up with. I think it's an idea we shouldn't be opposed by. So it got some pushback. We don't actually know if the NBA would do it. We don't even know what the players think. So we'll have to see about all that. But it's an idea that's been proposed. We'll see if anybody may be interested in potentially going with that idea. Dirk Nowitzki, former Dallas Mavericks, great Hall of Famer, probably, has been offered a job with the Dallas Mavericks. A standing formal offer to join them. Obviously, this is a current trend as a lot of former players or great players that played in a franchise for so long comes back to a franchise to become part of the front office or coaching. Obviously, you see it in the 76ers with Elton Brand. You see it in San Antonio with Tim Duncan. You see it in other places. Obviously, even not even just NBA level, sometimes the college level. Obviously, Juwan Howard at Michigan. That's an example. Hardaway at Memphis. You see it all around. And so for me, I feel like if Dirk does it, I'm sure he'll be welcomed back to the team. And you never know. We don't know what position technically. I'm sure it'll be front office, maybe some front office coaching potentially. And then you never know. Maybe Dirk can either way can work his way up to a top executive or maybe a top coach. And then we never know. We could see Dirk on the sidelines being a head coach one day. I mean, we don't know. We don't know if he's going to take it yet. But obviously, that's something that's been out there. It's been offered to him. And we'll have to see what he actually decides to actually do. He's a great guy, great person, and ain't no reason to think he couldn't be able to. I think he'd be great in whatever role that they put him in. Dirk has always had the work ethic and the ability to do anything he puts his mind to. It's just a matter of, does he want to go into that type of role? Does he want to deal with those types of things? Does he want to go into the ranks and then basically start working and traveling and, doing a lot of different things? That's kind of the big thing he has to ask himself, and we'll have to see what maybe he decides to do. Also, some Laker news here. The Lakers want to add another shooter. So they've been having some talks that they might still potentially bring in J.R. Smith as the other shooter. Obviously, that's going to be very interesting if they do decide to make that move. I think it's something that you can't really rule out. If I'm anybody, J.R. Smith definitely could add, passing and shooting to the team and improve their team in that regard. J.R. Smith can also still play defense at this point in his career. He says he's ready. He says he's ready to play whenever they need him, and all he needs is the opportunity to go out there and show it and prove it. So we'll have to see if they actually do decide to potentially bring him in and actually sign him to a deal, and then that probably would complete their playoff roster. A roster that looks very good on paper. And we would just go from there. And lastly, in Laker news too, also, the Lakers actually, obviously, has been said to want to have interest in Derrick Rose at the trade deadline. And the thing about it is, with the trade deadline, they offered Alex Caruso for Derrick Rose. They tried to flip that deal. Honestly, if I was Pistons, I would feel very disrespected. I think they offered a pick, but obviously, the Lakers don't have a lot of picks that they can really use. So they feel like, oh, well, we're not interested. I would have felt like they did the Dane Green Caruso deal, maybe. Just Caruso himself, I don't think he's good enough to flip for a player like Derrick Rose and what Derrick Rose has done this season. So I think that was very interesting to see. Obviously, just as interesting sometimes to see throughout the year, or even out the offseason, sometimes you'll hear about teams, oh, they tried to make a trade for so-and-so, because you really don't know if all those trades were attempted to be made. You really don't. So, coming up next, we're going to get into some college basketball talk. Obviously, we entered our last official weekend of the regular season. Now we're heading into tournament time, one of the most exciting times in college basketball. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment We talked about the Atlanta Hawks CEO talking about how he thinks they should push the season back to December so they're not competing with the NFL. And I gave my thoughts on that. And if I think it's an idea that maybe some people would listen to or sometimes want to do. I also talked about Laker news, like Alex Caruso being offered for Derrick Rose at the trade deadline. And also the Lakers are open to adding another shooter, trying to improve the depth of the team. And also, I talked about the Dallas Mavericks offering Dirk Nowitzki a job to be a part of their organization in a formal job offer. But now, we're going to get some college basketball talk. Obviously, you know what I do here. I give you a recap of what happened this week in college basketball, this weekend, big games, anything like that, upsets. And I also, if I have time at the end, I will give you the new AP 25 poll, top 10 teams we usually talk about going into it. So obviously we're going to start with the Thursday games. Houston was upset by Connecticut 77-71. Obviously, Houston was the number 21 team at the time. The Cougars will make the tournament, so there's no problem there. Huskies winning this game to potentially make the tournament, potentially still have a chance to get in. Obviously, they still can get in if they were able to win the American Conference tournament, but obviously they also need some quality wins, and they may be able to get in at large or last four in. Ohio State beat Illinois in a good Big Ten matchup between 19 and 23, 71-63. Just another good win for Ohio State. Ohio State's been playing some better basketball of late. The Fighting Alumni, both of these teams are probably going to make it to the tournament, so no problem, no issue. San Diego State, 29-1 a year. You know, beating Air Force, team they should beat, doing what they got to do out there. And then we get to the Saturday games. Duke obviously beating UNT in their big rivalry, 89-76. And obviously that brings the disappointing year for the North Carolina Tar Heels to an end. They will get no tournaments after this, no other games. Some of the teams will never play another snap of basketball in college basketball again. And the Duke Blue Devils continue their season going into the ACC tournament. Obviously, what I mean by with the Tar Heels not getting in, it's just more in terms of unless they somehow, wins, the ACC tournament, their season is over past regular season stuff like the ACC tournament. Utah State actually upset at San Diego State on Saturday, 59-56. Big three-pointer at the buzzer to win the Mountain West Basketball Championship. Obviously, a second crucial loss for San Diego State. Still will get into the tournament. Might drop to a 4 seed now. The Aggies are 26-8. And they've had quietly a great season for the team. They got an automatic bid. They're going to the tournament. Utah State is a team to be reckoned with. They can play. They can ball at a high level. They have all the talent in the world to compete and be a Cinderella in this year's NCAA tournament, and you better watch out. Penn State was upset by Northwestern. Northwestern is 8-22 in the year. Penn State's 21-10, so obviously this was a huge upset in Big Ten basketball. Obviously Northwestern, unless again they somehow make a run to the Big Ten championship and win, they are not going to the tournament. But it was great to end their season on the note they did in terms of regular season basketball. Virginia beats Louisville 57-54. As you can tell from all these guys, if you notice why these Virginia games, they're in the 40s and they're in the 50s. They do not let the other team hit 60, and they just score just enough points on their end to beat these teams. Another low-scoring affair. Virginia is truly one of the best teams in the tournament, the defending national champions. So you don't want to count them out. You don't want to assume that they're done for. And listen, with this type of defense, if they can play defense like this every game, it's going to work. But obviously, Louisville losing that game just kind of hurt them in terms of winning a share of the ACC, and that's why that was a big loss for them. So obviously, they're trying to bounce back, hopefully try to attempt to win the ACC tournament. Kansas beat Texas Tech 66-62, close game. Obviously, I expected it to be a close game. This is one of my games that could potentially be on upset alert, but they were able to come out with a victory. Great competitive game. That's all you really want. Now they get to the Big 12 championship. It'll be interesting to see what happens. This is one of the tournaments that a lot of upsets can happen. A lot of things can happen. You might have a team who doesn't get in that could have gotten in. Not because they weren't good enough, but just because the conference was so good. Creighton and Seton Hall battled. Creighton won 77-60, blowing out number 8 Seton Hall to number 11 Creighton. Obviously, this is two great teams. Both teams making the NCAA tournament. And basically, they're both going to be there. They might have to play. They're going to probably, if they do well, going to have to play each other again in their tournament. And we're going to have to see what happens if that does happen. Both teams, obviously, beat each other this year, so it's going to be important for them to bounce back from losses like this and maybe try to break that 1-1 tie that they have with each other. Kentucky beat Florida 71-70. Kentucky was down by 16 and came all the way back to beat the Florida Gators. I said this was another upset pick of the week, and I almost got it. I'm 0 for 2 so far, but that's how I go sometimes. It's okay. It's all right. And, just good win for Kentucky. Showing fight. Even without their best player, Higgins, he didn't play. He had personal issues, and he didn't play in the game, and the Kentucky was still able to pull out a comeback at Florida. All the things were against them, and they were able to do it and get the job done. Baylor was upset this week by West Virginia, 76-64. The Baylors, after winning one game, has lost 3 games now of their last 7. And right now they're not playing their great basketball right now. Obviously, this was senior day for the Mountaineers, so it was great to get that big win against Baylor. You might see these teams again in the Big 12 tournament. So we'll see if maybe Baylor can get the revenge. Obviously on a neutral site. Villanova squeezes out against Georgetown and wins. Just keeping their season pretty much on good standing and playing at a high level going into their tournaments. Iowa and Illinois, Big Ten dominated on Sunday. Illinois was able to win 78-76 over Iowa. Great game. Both teams competed at a high level. Played at a high level. High-scoring game in college standards, 78-76. They won. Both teams making the tournament. Nothing to worry about. Just going to be interesting to see who, if one of these teams can win their own conference tournament. Michigan State beat Ohio State. Obviously, this was Cassius Winston's last game in East Lansing. The great guard for Michigan State. Probably an NFL draft pick, NBA draft pick when he comes out, beating Ohio State 80-69. Still more basketball to play, but the last one he'll play at Michigan State, obviously tough, but it's like that sometimes. Maryland and Michigan. Maryland beat Michigan 83-70. Big win for Maryland, bouncing back from another upset, beating a good quality team like Michigan, who's been starting to play better at the end of the season. So you can't really be mad at that. Great performance from all those guys, and just contributing to the future of the franchise and the future of the program. Houston beats Memphis 64-57. Memphis obviously border NCAA tournament. I think they'll get in. Houston obviously winning this game. I think they'll definitely get in, and continue to see what happens. We'll have to see what Memphis does when the tournament comes around for them in the American Conference, and see what they end up doing at the end of that. But there you go. That's your college basketball update for the week. We don't have enough time to get into the Rapey ranking, but I'll get into that Thursday. But now, in our last segment, coming up next, I'm going to talk about why are so many teams in that mediocre echelon, or in that echelon where you feel like you max out, but it's not championship material against some of the topper teams in the league. I'm just going to break it down for you guys. I don't know if I explained that great enough, but you'll obviously learn more when the segment goes on right here on the podcast. Stay.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Back to GSMC Basketball Podcast. Right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Last segment we talked about everything college basketball. Obviously we just ended the regular season of college basketball. So now we're getting into tournament madness. First, obviously we've had some conference tournaments in already, and we have conference tournaments to come that are going to go throughout the week every day. And basically they're going to come out there and compete to try to see if any team that maybe not in just based off the resume from the regular season could potentially win their entire tournament and then get into the tournament. And also, teams on the bubble can use this as a way of still getting in, even if they don't win the tournament, because if they beat maybe a quality team during this tournament, that might be what gets them over the top and gets them into the NCAA tournament when Selection Sunday comes up this Sunday. Now, I'm gonna discuss something with you guys. I like sometimes doing this for the last segment of the show. Discussing things around the league, trends, why something is happening, things like that. And today we're gonna discuss why you have so many teams, what they say mediocrity in the NBA, or that team you can never get over the hump, why you have so many of those teams. To me, I want to start with players. Think about Utah. They're well coached. Defensively, they're one of the best teams in the league. Young star in Donovan Mitchell. Rudy Gobert's an all-star. But even with the improvements they made, it still just feels like they couldn't get over the hump when it comes to the Lakers or the Clippers. And in some people's mind, even maybe the Rockets and the Nuggets. And if they don't win this year and they continue to lose in the playoffs, there's going to be a point where you feel like, okay, mediocrity. You've seen it with the Portland Trailblazers. Obviously, they've made it to Western Conference Finals, but they got swept. And so they really haven't been that close to the NBA Finals. And they have Damian Lillard, one of the best players in the game, one of the best point guards in the game. And they have CJ McCollum, one of the better two guards in the game. And it just feels like year after year they're stuck in this period of middleness in the league. And a lot of teams sometimes suffer this for years. The Hawks did this for about almost a decade. They would make the playoffs every year, but you knew they were never the best team, even when they were the number one seed, because they never had that superstar or that player who you thought was better, or they always had a player who was the best player on the court. Like, think about it. During that 60-win season with the Hawks, and all the series they played, they didn't have the best player on the floor in any of those series. They just had a very well-grounded collective unit that was able to overcome maybe a player being the best player in the series. Until they get to a team that's just as good as a unit, and then they have a better player or players than you. You see it with Portland. They can be I think they could, for the last few years, I feel like they could be every team in the Western Conference but Golden State, because Golden State just has too many better players than them. And they did it last year even without Kevin Durant and swept them. With a limited bench and just really your best three guys were Steph, Clay, and Draymond. And they couldn't get a game. And those are the type of performances and things that happen that just makes you think as a fan, damn, if we can't beat that, it feels like we're just stuck. How can we ever advance and move forward? Moving forward. You know? It's one of those questions that every fan asks themselves. Because you love the fact your team's going to win games and they're going to make the playoffs. That's exciting. But it's just like, after a year or two, it's just like, okay, so when are we going to start like progressing? When are we going to start potentially competing for a championship? And that's what the big deal in question is. And I think that's why it feels like you're just stuck in this pool of mediocrity always. Because it just feels like what really can we do to really get over the top? And so it's one of the most hardest things, I think, for any coach, team, player to go through. And, you know, it's one of the hardest dilemmas as a GM also, because you just feel like, well, what can we do to improve the team? What can we do to improve the performance? What can we do to be better than what we've been? That's kind of the big thing that every GM has to answer. Because you could lose a job after a while getting to the playoffs every year and losing. The Hawks during that 10-year stretch making the playoffs had 3 head coaches. Because they just felt like, is it the coach? Is it the coach? Is it the coach? You can have a great coach. You can have good, fit, well together pieces. But if you don't got that superstar, that top 5 guy, it feels like you can never really get to championship status. And even in Anthony Davis' situation, he's a top 5 player but can never do anything because he's a big man. He has to be fed the ball to be able to do that. If he's not fed the ball, he can't do it. He can't have that. So that's why if you have a superstar guard or a superstar forward, you have a better chance of winning at a high clip. Because it takes a lot for a star to be able to win. Look, listen, I don't think you can have one star and think you can win to that degree, even though we feel like in Milwaukee that's what's going on. But the structure of their team is different. And that's what I'm saying. The head coach and the good players and a star can get you a lot of games, can get you in that discussion. But if you keep coming up short, there's going to be that dilemma of, is your star good enough? Giannis, I think, is a champion level star. So, but the thing is, you feel like if they had a second star, oh yeah, Milwaukee finals, of course. In the Eastern Conference, of course. That's why when the Raptors won last year, it was such a aberration. They were always sometimes the best record, second best record in the league, very well coached, great defensively, had some star players, not superstar, but star players like DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, but could never do it because every time they ran into LeBron, who LeBron trumps everybody in the league, it feels like, they couldn't do anything. Like, they literally could be anybody else in the Eastern Conference but LeBron. And everybody just felt like it was just LeBron's presence is what made them shrink. But they get Kawhi Leonard, and luckily LeBron left the East, and now they're the best team in the Eastern Conference. And it's one thing, obviously, like I said, no fan wants to be mediocre. Because it makes you have false hope. Like, what if we were to catch a break one year and one of the teams that maybe beat us have injuries? You're always looking for something to maybe help you get over the top and get you to that point. You're looking for something that you can maybe say, hey, this could be what gets us to that level that we want to be at. We don't know, though. And obviously, we'll have to see what happens for the future of everything. We have to see what happens in the future of the franchise. And we'll just have to see what happens long term. So that was kind of my little breakdown there of why mediocrity is so looked down upon in the NBA. What happens when you're in mediocrity, having all the other components but not having that key star player or a topper level star player can hold you back and all of that. But thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here, the GSMC Podcast Network. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And thank you for listening and tuning into the show. Have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.